relation to pill testing.
Member for Emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I'll just get the papers together here. So, Mr. Acting President, I move the motion standing in my name, and I'll make some overarching and background comments initially, and then address each point of this motion separately. At the outset, I will say that taking of illicit drugs is not safe and carries a very real risk of serious adverse health outcomes and occasionally tragic deaths. I reiterate, there is no safe level of drug use, whether we are talking about so-called party drugs or other illicit drugs. Secondly, this motion in no way condones, supports or approves of the use of party drugs or any other illicit drugs. This motion seeks support of the House to minimise the harms associated with drug use at Tasmanian music festivals and events. I also acknowledge that drug analysis services, what we commonly know as pill testing, is only one aspect of a comprehensive drug policy. Education will always be a critical component of any health-related policy, including drug policy, which is the core purpose of pill testing. A zero-tolerance approach denies the reality of historic and current drug use and can be contrary to the effective harm minimisation and drug avoidance strategies and policies. Interestingly, research shows that party drug users are a heterogeneous group of consumers, many of whom are educated, socially and economically stable, and who rarely come in contact with the criminal justice system, treatment or support services, and so notionally don't fit the often expressed stereotypical illicit drug user impression. In an article titled Worth the Test, Pragmatism, Pill Testing and Drug Policy in Australia, written by Andrew Groves and was published in 2018 in the Harm Reduction Journal, Mr Groves evaluates Australia's drug policy strategy and analyses current drug policy literature and research studies. I commend the paper to all members and will reference this paper during my contribution. In this paper, the practicalities and application of Australian drug policies were explored, noting that at a practical level, problems exist regarding the capacity of policy to recognise and respond to emerging patterns of problematic use. Where novel, unknown drugs have entered the markets at a time when regular users have increased consumption of more potent forms such as ice, crystal methamphetamine or MDMA, arguing that the goal should be to reduce the harms that occur when people use these unknown or more potent drugs given the serious risks. So quoting from the paper, it says, notably, despite law enforcement efforts and legislative changes, current harm reduction initiatives are being largely ineffective, evident in monitoring data where certain groups of young people appear to resist social controls by continuing to use party drugs. As noted in previous studies, this is because many young people see drugs as playing a normative and peripheral role in their lives, revealing an important transition in patterns of use where party drugs have become more mainstream, used by a heterogeneous cohort of ordinary young people. This apparent normalisation has occurred alongside a trend where some users are unaware of what they are taking, engaging in opportunistic purchase of drugs at clubs or music festivals rather than prior to events from more trusted networks. Although no use is safe, these ad hoc practices substantially increase the risks as suppliers are more likely to be strangers who have a greater propensity to adulterate drugs with cheaper and or alternative substances. Reports have increased of ecstasy pills containing large amounts of methamphetamine and other toxic substances, for example rat poison, and others recorded at very high purity, which could seriously harm users. In combination, the rise of problematic patterns of use, the emergence of novel substances and imbalanced policy highlight the need for targeted and more pragmatic responses to youth drug use." End quote. So, Mr Acting President, I firmly believe that none of us in this place want to see young lives lost, even if these individuals are engaging in risk-taking behaviour. We see every generation engage in risk-taking behaviour during adolescence and early adulthood, particularly, and as all of us have been adolescents, we can and should reflect on that. We may have engaged in risky behaviour related to alcohol, to drugs, to sex, to driving and other recreational activities, just to name a few. We obviously all survived, and for some of us it may have been more by good luck than by good behaviour as measured by general societal standards. Many of us have also raised adolescent children and know the anxiety and challenges of this important role. Some of us have experienced the adverse impact of some of the risk-taking behaviour our children have engaged in. For some, that's yet to come. It's a worrying time. Regardless of these risk behaviours, young people do not deserve to die. I believe young people do not take risks intending for their friends or themselves to be harmed. They generally believe they are 10 foot tall and invincible. If you remember back then, you probably thought the same of yourself. Sadly, this is not the reality for some young people. We acknowledge and respond to this reality in our approach to road safety. We take a safe systems approach to road safety as we acknowledge we cannot prevent every crash, but we can minimise the damage done. Even when a person may have broken the law in their driving behaviour and participate in risky behaviour, I challenge anyone in this place to say they've never broken the law while driving, even if it's only driving a few k's over the limit. Pill testing is a similar measure and should be considered from a harm minimisation, health and wellbeing framework that it fits within our drug policy area, alongside other existing law enforcement activities. Law enforcement in the areas of manufacturing, supply and trafficking of illicit drugs at music festival events is and will continue to be a vital aspect of law enforcement. This harm minimisation approach is well recognised and has been adopted with beneficial impacts to intravenous drug use through needle and syringe exchange programs and safe injecting rooms. Both these measures were not fully supported when first introduced, predominantly because drug policy was a political tool through which zero tolerance principles flourished, and education programs and messaging focused on a just say no approach, or don't make bad choices, and a don't do drugs approach. This approach stems from the lasting legacy of the 20th century, where the drug problem was seen as a war to be won, with winning the war aligned with increasing anxiety about crime generally, and attempts to create fear in society of the harms of drug taking. Mr. Acting President, this outdated approach ignores reality and the culture of generations. Every generation complains about the youth of today, or older generation. Prohibition simply doesn't work at a society level. Education and support is and will continue to be needed. Pill testing provides targeted opportunities to educate and counsel a group of people who can be difficult to engage in education related to drug use at a moment in time when that young person has the opportunity to act. It may be the only time they have an opportunity to act in that interaction with the health professional. The recent deaths of young Australian Music Festival attendees from party drug overdoses have added to the debate regarding the effectiveness of Australian drug policies. The most recent deaths are currently before the New South Wales Coroner's Court, with findings expected later this year. Because of that, I won't be referring specifically to these tragic deaths. Some may suggest that we should wait for the coroner's findings to be released before we consider this motion. I would suggest this is completely avoiding an issue that we know has resulted in a number of tragic deaths in other jurisdictions, and from the evidence in the public arena already from the coroner's investigation, it is highly likely harm minimisation methods or measures such as pill testing will be required in order to hold such events in the future. So, Mr. Acting President, this is a pragmatic motion that does not call for the implementation of pill testing. It doesn't even call for the implementation of a pill testing trial. I'll get more to that when we get to point 8 in the motion. It calls for the government to investigate what steps would be needed to actually undertake a trial. It only calls for that for the government to explore those options about what steps would be needed to facilitate a trial before the summer music festivals. So I encourage members to approach it from that perspective. Let's be on the front foot and prepared to engage in a process that will educate our young people through a proven harm minimisation approach, save lives, and also build on the available research and data that's already there. That's what this motion is calling for. Notwithstanding the tragic loss of a number of young people over recent years, according to the research paper by Andrew Groves, what is concerning is that these fatal overdoses and several near misses may have been avoided through a more pragmatic and amoral drug policy and practice. As I mentioned, Australia has and is widely lauded for its harm minimisation approach to drugs. However, research suggests that over the last 30 years, these policies have been fragmented, sometimes inconsistent and contradictory. Many of the experience from other countries suggests there is a need in Australia for drug policy reform, and there is an opportunity to learn from international studies which have shown promising findings in the reduction of harm of party drug use and its harm through the application of pill testing services. Before addressing each of the points of the motion, I believe it's important to note the limitations and gaps in the research in this area. In doing so, I note that pill testing trials and other research in this area will add to the growing body of evidence that is needed. Groves in his article acknowledges this need, and I quote, "Like most debates about public policy, a key question in the rationale for pill testing is whether it works. The literature is complicated, and to date no studies have fully tested in a controlled manner, in a controlled way, where the pill testing reduces harms. Most evaluations concern attitudinal change, for example, what people would do, legal issues and the integrity of various analytic processes, with others describing program features or contextually relevant praxis. So, although not within the scope of this paper, a large multi-site systemic review of testing practices is needed. Nevertheless, part of the paradox of pill testing comes from the expectations of drug policy and practice generally, where effectiveness is often measured in the language of abstinence. A robust body of literature has shown, however, abstinence is a goal that displays ignorance of reality. A much broader definition is needed, which demarcates effectiveness from pragmaticality, as any strategy shown to improve public health or reduce the prevalence or severity of drug-related harms. For example, connecting users with support services, increasing education and awareness, monitoring market changes and encouraging avoidance of dependence are strategies shown to be effective in Europe. Despite this, like in the UK, Australian policymakers have appeared to take limited account of these findings." End quote. This supports the approach of including pill testing as part of a comprehensive drug policy, but not limiting it to this alone, and introducing and trialling it alongside ongoing research to determine what measures are effective. So, Mr. Acting President, to address each of the points of the motion. Point 1, the motion acknowledges that pill testing is a health-related matter. Pill testing is first and foremost a medical intervention that provides education and health information from qualified medical and health practitioners to patrons who are considering consuming an illicit drug or substance, generally at music festivals. In the ACT trial, qualified chemists, nurses, emergency department doctors and counsellors volunteered their professional skills and time to the delivery of the pill testing services. The interactions between the festival patrons and the health professionals is conducted within a health service delivery model based on evidence and research related to trials and experiences in other jurisdictions. Qualified staff conduct a chemical analysis of samples brought by patrons, then interpret the results and provide advice and information about the risks associated with consumption. Regardless of the results of analysis, all patrons are advised that there is no safe level of drug use and are encouraged to dispose of their drugs in the amnesty bin provided, which is later collected and disposed of by ambulance staff. So, Mr. Acting President, I want to repeat that. This is one of the biggest myths out there, that this condones pill taking. Regardless of the results of the analysis of the pill testing, all patrons are advised by the health professionals that there is no safe level of drug use, and they are all encouraged to dispose of their drugs in the amnesty bin provided. As I said, this motion in no way condones illicit drug use, and it may be the only opportunity a person in that situation has to reconsider their decision. Pill testing stations are always located within the medical precinct of festivals or events and work cooperatively with health and ambulance staff on site and festival organisers. While pill testing is not the only health intervention that should be provided to minimise the potential harms associated with illicit drug use, it is an important and effective measure to reduce harm and provide important health information to patrons. And it may be their first time they've ever heard any information about the risks from a health professional. So point 2 of the motion acknowledges that pill testing is an evidence-based health service that reduces the risk of illicit drug harm at music festivals and events. So, Acting President, the prevalence of illicit drug use at music festivals is very high, and most patrons of pill testing stations are often young, first-time or very naive and occasional drug users. To suggest that it's not happening or not happening frequently is completely wrong and completely naive of anyone to suggest that. I've had messages from parents who, thankfully, their children have told them, their young adult children have told them they have actually taken the pills, and it horrifies them. So it is happening. The risk of death or serious injury is very high, as we have seen by the 6 deaths in New South Wales and Victoria at music festivals over the 2018-19 summer period. Pill testing is an evidence-based harm reduction strategy used internationally. It is also known as drug checking or adulterant screening that commenced in the early 1990s in the Netherlands, where it is now part of official national policy. Grove's article describes the process. A quote, testing involves dance party and music festival attendees volunteering a sample of their drugs for analysis by scientists who provide information concerning composition and purity. In Europe, this is typically undertaken in mobile facilities located near or inside venues to allow timely feedback to users, approximately 30 minutes. And further, these practices are possible through partnerships between event promoters, healthcare services and local police and a strong harm reduction philosophy, end quote. So pill testing is now commonplace at music festivals in Europe and has proven to drastically reduce and even eliminate deaths in some countries. In addition to the Netherlands, pill testing services are routinely available in Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Spain, Portugal and France. It has been recently legislated in Iceland, and New Zealand also just recently passed legislation to do so there. Since the introduction of pill testing, Portugal has had 0 deaths at music festivals, and research from pill testing in Austria found that 50% of those who use the drug testing service believe the results influenced their drug taking behaviour, which means they may have taken less or not taken them at all. Recent evaluation of pill testing in the UK showed that 2/3 of patrons who had their pills tested decided not to consume the drugs. So 2/3 didn't take them. And those who took them anyway consumed significantly less than they planned and said they would warn their friends of the inherent risks. So the flow-on benefit. As noted in the Groves article, and I quote, several studies and the 2013 National Drug Strategy Household Survey report suggested many Australians see little value in punitive sanctions, for example imprisonment, increased fines for drug use. Instead, referral of users to treatment or education programs appears the preferred response, approximately 45%, with other drug manufacture and distribution perceived to warrant harsh penalties. Drawing from a large and N greater than 2,300 internet survey of young Australians, Lancaster and colleagues report the majority backed the implementation of pill testing, 82.5%, as well as other harm reduction initiatives, and from the National Drug Strategy Household Survey, NSEPs, that is 76% they support, and the chill out zones they support 65.6% support. Even after the greater level of support was reported in a survey conducted at a major Australian music festival in 2016, where most participants, 86.5%, believed testing services could help reduce harm for users, these findings describe a cohort that values information and seeks to engage in safer practices, regardless of whether they use drugs. Notably, many youth also appear to translate this drug knowledge into behavioural change, with an Australian study finding more than 3/4 of regular ecstasy users would not take an unknown pill. A similar result was identified in a more recent sample of users at Australian dance parties and music festivals, where 90% reported seeking information about drug contents in the last 12 months. Most of these respondents, 60%, had encountered unexpected substances or problems with drug purity during this period, which motivated them to alter their behaviour, with more than half warning friends, 51%, many deciding not to consume their drugs, 39%, and more than a quarter reducing the amount they consumed, 28%. Most respondents also reported they would use a form of self-testing, 94%, on-site testing, 94%, or a fixed site, that is drop-in service, and valued services that provided comprehensive individual feedback rather than only when dangerous results were found. This reinforces previous claims that young people can be persuaded to make rational decisions and are willing to use testing services which may elicit positive behavioural change at a time of use, reducing some drug-related harms. So, the end quote. So, Mr Acting President, as I said, these people have already arrived at the festival with their pills usually, or they may buy them on site with the intention of taking them. We can see here that when they have that intention, this actually alters behaviour and can reduce harm. Mr President, Acting President, these are pretty compelling statistics. An additional benefit to pill testing occurs through increased publicity for support services, advocacy for public health campaigns, and opportunities for monitoring and research. A pill testing trial in Tasmania, should it be conducted, would add to this body of knowledge and ongoing research into the effectiveness of these trials and the associated educational programs that are delivered as part of them. Whilst it is noteworthy, as noted in the article, that these positive outcomes have also served to extend discussion beyond notions of individual criminality and morality to encompass social, economic and welfare debates, challenging conventional thinking about concepts like harm and risk and social responsibility, it continues to be important to emphasise that drug use is dangerous and cannot be conceptualised as risk-free, nor is pill testing a silver bullet. I think it's important that we continue to come back to that. Another one of those myths out there is that it's the be-all and end-all, or it doesn't work at all. Okay, it has to be part of a comprehensive program, and it is an opportunity for those engaged in the process to be informed of, or to be actively informed that drug taking is dangerous and is not without risk. So, quoting from the Groves article again, he said, instead this article argues that pill testing needs to be viewed through a lens of pragmatism, where for certain users in certain settings, it is about providing young people with information about drugs and their use so that they can make more informed choices to limit the associated harms, as well as making important practical changes to the settings in which drugs are used. End quote. So, Mr Acting President, I feel compelled to reiterate that allowing young people to make informed choices is in no way condoning drug use. I'm sure we all tell our kids not to drive in dangerous manners because of the obvious risk associated with that. We do the same with sex, do the same with alcohol. And whilst driving's legal, alcohol's legal, but driving your car over the limit, drinking and driving, and using your phone while you're driving is not legal. It is first and foremost about allowing young people to make informed choices about the risk of drug use, because as I've already commented, we are naive to think that telling people to say no actually works. In some cases it can make them more likely to do it. Another approach is critical, and one that is delivered in a manner that is accessible, non-judgmental and confidential. Grove's article highlights the need to share responsibility when dealing with risky behaviours. The article states, it highlights the need to share responsibility for tackling drug use across the community. Given the drug-related harm intersects with the criminal justice issues, health, vulnerability and various social problems, complex challenges faced by young people that require interdisciplinary and comprehensive responses. It's not something on its own, it's part of a whole package. So Groves refers to the introduction of the Illicit Drug Diversion Initiative, IDDI, in 1999, which officially signalled the utility of an operational relationship between police, health and support agencies. He also describes another positive collaboration I mentioned earlier, the introduction of the Needle and Syringe Exchange Program, NSEPs, and the Medically Supervised Injection Centre, MSIC in Sydney. Groves acknowledges that the initial conflict between police and health workers linked to these initiatives, legislative reforms and changes to the New South Wales Police operating procedures, which encourage police to exercise discretion, work collaboratively and develop a positive relationship with local needle and syringe exchange programs and promote the legal operation and positive outcomes of the needle and syringe exchange programs in the wider community. So, Mr Acting President, we know such harm minimisation approaches can result in improved outcomes. It is important to note, as the article does, that making assumptions about the value of pill testing based solely on the introduction of the needle and syringe exchange programs and the safe injecting centres, or the medical injecting centres, is inappropriate, as the driving factors are not the same and there are specific conditions that led to their introduction. Primarily the motivation for these initiatives came from general concerns regarding public health and the threat posed by HIV and the need to avoid an HIV epidemic. But we know that the people were reusing their needles and syringes to inject illicit drugs. So whilst it might be to prevent HIV spreading, or in aim of doing that, it also was allowing people to continue to inject safely from the point of contracting a potentially lethal virus. Groves acknowledges that nonetheless there are examples of pragmatic responses that sought to reduce drug-related harms as well as foster cross-sectorial partnerships, just as this motion calls for. Which brings me to number 3 of the motion. Acknowledges that pill testing services do not endorse or provide advice on the safety of illicit drug use, and there is no research or evidence to support the view that pill testing increases drug use. In fact, we've had quite the contrary, Mr President, in my previous comments. So on this point, Mr Acting President, there is misinformed concern that pill testing services could leave people with a false sense of security that the makeup of the substance or pill is safe. This is not the case. The on-site staff at pill testing stations are qualified health professionals who do not endorse drug use or promote any illicit drug use as being safe. The inherent risks involved in drug taking are discussed with those using the service in a non-judgmental, confidential and safe environment. The 10 to 15 minutes while an individual is waiting for the results of the analysis provides a rare opportunity for health professionals to discuss drug use, risks and harm reduction strategies at a critical moment in time. This rare opportunity for brief intervention should not be undervalued and is possibly the most important aspect of the whole system. You've got 15 minutes thereabouts with a health professional who's telling you it's not safe to take this. Here's your chance. Pill testing stations target people who've already purchased illicit substances and have already taken significant risks by bringing them into the music festival to start with, and thus they're fairly committed to taking them. The staff within pill testing stations do not in this moment judge the individual, chastise or lecture. That's not the role of pill testing services. We'll leave that for the parents, usually if they get to go home. Pill testing stations offer a last and perhaps life-saving opportunity for someone to be informed of the serious risks and change their mind about consumption. To describe this process, I wish to read from a summary provided by Gino van Bakker, co-founder and president of Harm Reduction Australia, at a workshop in March this year facilitated by the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council of Tasmania for Tasmania's major music festivals. Harm Reduction Australia auspices Pill Testing Australia and delivered the 2 pill testing trials that have been held in the ACT. So I'm going to quote from this information sheet they provided to explain how it's done so that there can be no misinformation out there of what actually happens. So, to quote, how does a pill testing service work? There are 5 key stages to the process. 1, patrons entering a pill testing station are greeted by a counsellor or peer worker who talks them through the process. The patron signs a waiver form and hands over their mobile phone. In brackets, no photos are allowed within the pill testing station to ensure confidentiality. 2, the patron provides a sample, a scraping of their drug, which is provided to the chemist who uses mobile drug analysis technology to assess the contents of the drug. 3, once complete, the patron speaks to a medical professional, for example a GP, who will talk them through the substances identified in the drug and the risks associated with consuming the drug. Never at any stage does a medical professional tell the patron the drug is safe or condone drug use. 4, the patron is offered the opportunity to take a wristband with a number that corresponds to the results of the drug analysis, with the results of their drug analysis results. In the case of a serious medical emergency, paramedics can take this wristband to the pill testing station and access information on what substance the patron has consumed or may have consumed. 5, the patron then speaks one final time to the counsellor or peer worker who provides the patron with additional information on the risks of drug use, again, advises them where the amnesty bin is if the patron chooses to dispose of their drug, and provides them with the information on what to do in the case of an emergency. End quote. I can't see how this condones drug taking. So, Mr. Acting President, this is important because we know that a key reason why someone may not seek medical advice is because they're afraid of getting in trouble with the police. There has been a lot of conjecture recently in regards to the sophistication of the technology of pill testing that Pill Testing Australia uses, including concerns that it will not provide accurate readings or that will not identify every illicit substance in the sample. I have been informed by Pill Testing Australia that their technology is the most sophisticated mobile testing equipment available, and they will be down here again in September with this equipment if anyone does want to view it, with the capability to identify more than 30,000 chemical compounds and substances, including synthetics. If a substance is identified that is not within the database, the substance is immediately categorised as highly dangerous. And regardless of whether all substances are identified, it only takes the identification of one substance for it to be considered dangerous. So out of those 30,000 known substances, and plus any that are not known, are immediately labelled as dangerous, extremely dangerous, or highly dangerous, and that feeds through to the advice the patron is given.
Through you, Mr. Acting President, just to ask on that. So if it's considered there's something dangerous in it, that's given back to the person and told it's dangerous?
I'll get to that.
Is it big?
I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As I mentioned previously, staff in the pill testing stations never tell patrons that a drug is safe, as pill testing is first and foremost a medical intervention that provides education and information to patrons who are considering consuming an illicit drug. All patrons are encouraged to dispose of their drugs in the amnesty bin, but cannot and will not be compelled to. That might answer Member for Launceston's question. Mr. Acting President, it's also important to note the concerns raised by some members of the community that the pill testing technology's inability to test for purity of substances like ecstasy will provide false messages that these drugs are safe to take. This is also categorically incorrect and impossible given that pill testing Australia's technology does not test for purity. If any illicit substance is found, ecstasy or otherwise, the patron is informed of the risks and encouraged to dispose of the drug. There is also no evidence to support the view that pill testing increases drug use. Research shows that in fact pill testing positively changes attitudes to drug use, as I referred to research earlier, and reduces the likelihood of the drug being taken at all, and if it is in lower quantities. Grove's article provides the following on this. I quote, most notably pill testing has been shown to positively affect users' behaviour, contradicting claims often used as a rationale for criminalisation that soft options encourage increased uptake and use, particularly among youth. Evaluation of the Chequered project in Austria reported approximately half of the users whose drugs were tested indicated that information about quality/purity would influence their decision to take them. If presented with a negative result, 2/3 reported they would not consume their drugs and would also warn their friends against consumption. This corresponds with research from the Netherlands, which revealed no increase in the use of most party drugs or polydrug use because of pill testing and provision of drug information. This also supports evaluations of the reforms in Portugal, where pill testing, as part of a wider public health approach, in fact reduced problematic use, related harms and burden on the justice and healthcare systems. Evaluation of pill testing stations, which has been operating in Europe for almost 2 decades, show that people make different choices based on the results of the testing. Some choose to put their drugs in the amnesty bins, while others choose to take significantly less than they plan to. There is no evidence to support the view that pill testing increases drug use." End quote. An article by Professor Alison Ritter from the University of New South Wales and published in The Conversation in 2014 and updated in 2018 adds to the arguments supporting pill testing, and I quote, "Pill testing has been shown to change the black market. Products identified as particularly dangerous and subsequently became the subject of warning campaigns were found to leave the market. Research also shows that ingredients of tested pills started to correspond to the expected components over time. This suggests pill testing might be able to change the black market in positive ways." So, Mr. President, Acting President, I think it's important to acknowledge those points, that even though drug use may continue, you're not likely to see adulterated pills being sold because the word gets out. So to restate an important point I've mentioned, and I wish to reiterate, Professor Ritter also explains, and I quote, "Visits to pill testing booths create an important opportunity for providing support and information over and above the testing itself. They enable drug services to contact a population that is otherwise difficult to reach, because these people are not experiencing acute drug problems. Indeed, the intervention has been used to establish contact and as the basis for follow-up work with members of a not yet problematic but nevertheless high-risk groups of recreational drug users. Finally, pill testing means we can capture long-term data about the actual substances present in the drug scene, and it creates the potential for an early warning system beyond immediate users. This is becoming all the more important as new psychoactive substances that may be used as adulterants are appearing more frequently." End quote. So, Mr. Acting President, there's a range of positive benefits here in terms of harm minimisation, acknowledging at every stop that there is no safe way of taking illicit drugs, and this motion does not condone the use of illicit substances. I move to item 4. Acknowledges the successful results of 2 trials in the ACT that demonstrate the effectiveness of pill testing services to change a person's illicit behaviour. The results of Australia's first pill testing trial at the Groove and the Moo Festival in Canberra in 2018 proved the merits of pill testing. Of the 128 festival goers who had their drugs tested, 5 disposed of their pills in the amnesty bin provided after receiving the test results, and 42% of those who had their drugs tested said that their drug-taking behaviour would decrease as a result of the testing. Also, at the 2018 Canberra trial, drugs belonging to two festival attendees were found to contain N-ethylpentylone, an often lethal substance responsible for mass overdoses in Europe in recent years. Both of these two patients disposed of their pills immediately. From the second pill testing trial held in Canberra in April 2019, this year, initial figures highlight that of the 171 samples tested, 7 tested positive to the deadly N-ethylpentylone, with all 7 pills being voluntarily discarded into the amnesty bill. Evidence from the trial showed that patients desperately wanted to know more information about what they planned to consume and valued both the chemical analysis and the counselling offered by medical staff at the pill testing station. So, Mr Acting President, these results from the ACT are quite compelling. The trial was the result of extensive consultation with ACT ministers and the ACT government, and the development of an advisory committee focused on establishing a supportive environment to facilitate the trial. Additionally, extensive consultation was undertaken with the ACT Police Minister and the Commissioner for Police regarding how it would be implemented on the ground. Having police involvement and support for a trial of pill testing is crucial. The pill testing trial in the ACT was fully supported by other organisations within the medical precinct, especially ACT ambulance staff and services, and ACT festival organisers were ready and eager to proceed. Mr President, these actions are similar to those of Part 8 of the motion, with the calls to see pill testing trialled in Tasmania or to take the steps necessary. And some of those steps have been described in what I've just said. So Tasmania's major music festival organisers are firmly on board. Festival goers want to see it available, but predominantly younger people than most of the MPs in this parliament, and the technology is available. We need the government to take the steps and work with Tasmanian Police, health professionals and the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council of Tasmania and Harm Reduction Australia. So, Mr President, it's just laying out a framework for what needs to happen if you're going to put in place a trial, which I'll get more to in Part 8 of the motion. The Part 5 acknowledges that pill testing is supported by national bodies, including the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine, the Rural Doctors Association of Australia, the Australian Medical Association, the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation, the National Australian Pharmacy Students Association, the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia, the Ambulance Union State Council, the Public Health Association of Australia, Family Drug Support Australia and the Australian Drug Law Reform Foundation, and at a local level by Tasmanian community organisations including the Youth Network of Tasmania, the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre and Community Legal Centres Tasmania. Mr President, Mr Acting President, I note that the Youth Network of Tasmania is a spokesperson for youth, and most of us are well beyond our youth in this place, so we do need to take advice from those this directly impacts, speaking for myself particularly. So, Mr Acting President, these organisations listed in Part 5 of the motion are significant and broad, representing health bodies and bodies supporting and speaking up for young people. The government should not reject this united show of support. Since putting the motion on notice, the national body, Forensic and Clinical Toxicology Association, is also now in support, and the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council continues to be a leading voice on the matter. The Hobart City Council has confirmed its support for a trial, and other councils are also looking at doing so. Mr President, Acting President, pill testing services are utilised effectively in a range of countries to assist in reducing illicit drug use and harm. And as I mentioned earlier, just last week or the week before it might have been, New Zealand became the most recent country to join the growing number of countries to introduce pill testing services following the passage of amendments to their Misuse of Drugs Act. This Act will now give New Zealand Police discretion to take a health-centred approach. a move in response to a large number of deaths caused by dangerous synthetic substances and drugs. So, Mr Acting President, it's time the Tasmanian Government showed a more open approach and actively engaged in the conversations with organisations who have already shown their support for this health-related harm minimisation measure and support the establishment of a framework that would facilitate a pill testing trial. As a health service focused on harm minimisation, if we can prevent even one death or serious adverse outcome, the action will be justified. No one deserves to die from making an ill-advised choice. And when we can minimise that risk from a choice generally made prior to presenting to the pills testing station, we should. As I have stated, evidence suggests that such a service does not increase drug use, nor does it normalise illicit drug use. It also provides an opportunity to engage with a cohort of young people that can be difficult to reach through more traditional measures and often haven't come to the attention of law enforcement, the justice system, or even the health system. So point 6 of the motion notes that despite there being strong support for the introduction of pill testing services across the Tasmanian community, the government continues to be resistant to reviewing the evidence and or exploring how a trial would provide health benefits to Tasmania, particularly our youth. So the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council of Tasmania has previously offered to brief government on the evidence behind the merits of pill testing services alongside Pill Testing Australia. Former Health Minister Michael Ferguson was unwilling to be briefed and also did not accept an invitation from Harm Reduction Australia to attend the ACT's Pill Testing Services Forum, an invitation that was extended to all state and territory health ministers in April 2019 ahead of the second pill testing trial in Canberra's Groove and the Moo Festival. Mr Acting President, I don't understand the government's reticence to act or even to consider the available evidence. There is broad community support and support from almost every national professional medical and health body. A number of other countries have also acted. It's interesting too, Mr Acting President, that listening to the media and reading the media releases that have been put out on this matter from the government, it seems that Mr Ferguson continues to be the spokesperson. He's neither the Minister for Health, the Minister for Mental Health and Wellbeing, the Minister for Police, or the Minister for Justice. I'm not sure why he's the spokesperson. Maybe the leader might be able to enlighten me as to why he seems to be the one pulling the shots. In an article from The Conversation by Dr David Caldecott from the ANU and a member of Harm Reduction Australia titled "We Can't Eradicate Drugs, but we can stop people from dying from them," he describes what occurs in other countries and the non-evidence-based approach taken on some drug policy approaches. And I quote, "The European Union continues to roll out drug checking programs where party drugs are tested for strength at music festivals and other sites where they're consumed. In April, the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drugs Policy is considering decriminalising personal drug use." I'm not suggesting that here, Mr Acting President, by the way. This is quoting from Dr Caldecott's article. In the midst of this, Australia plods on with its punitive and prohibitionist ideals despite the rest of the world moving on. Whether it's the use of sniffer dogs at music festivals, which an Ombudsman's report found was ineffective in detecting drug dealers, or roadside drug testing, for which there is no evidence it prevents crashes, we are happy to adopt interventions that have little evidence behind them instead of those that do. The most fundamental shift on drugs policy worldwide has been from moralising about use to focusing on keeping young people safe. More people are beginning to accept that nowhere will ever be drug-free. Now over a decade-old US drug policy expert Marsha Rosenbaum's Safety First tells parents to replace "just say no," N-O, with "just say no," K-N-O-W, end quote. Taking an approach that ignores the reality of youth culture does not actually assist those most at risk. We must take our heads out of the sand and accept that although we may personally abhor illicit drug use, it is a reality for some young and occasional not so young people. We all take risks, but I do not believe we deserve to die as a result of taking those risks when death is not the intention. As a community, I'm certain we are not willing to continue with this serves you right mentality for those harmed. I hope that's where we're at. So, Mr. President, Acting President, there's Dr. Caldicott mentioned the negative impact that the Ombudsman found of having sniffer dogs at festivals, and the associated evidence around that people tend to see the police with the dog and then just take all the pills to get rid of them. And that I think more will come out on that in the coroner's report potentially, but I'm not sure. But that's a real risk, and it hasn't been proven to be effective. So point 7 of the motion recognises the need for the Department of Health to prepare information and educational materials outlining the community and individual health benefits of drug analysis services to educate and inform the broader Tasmanian community. So, Mr. Acting President, there's a need for Department of Health to be on the front foot in any health matters, and they do a pretty good job in many areas, or very good job in many areas. Part of bringing this motion on for debate was also to add to that public commentary, get some factual information out there in the public about what pill testing actually is and also what it isn't. So, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, there is much information available to assist the Department of Health to prepare information and educational materials outlining the community and individual health benefits of drug analysis services to educate and inform the broader Tasmanian community. I would suggest the government have a moral obligation to undertake public education in this area. You don't have to condone an activity to take action to inform the public of the risks. This should include the health benefits of drug analysis services. A denial of the reality facing families with young adult children and for the young people themselves whose voices are often not heard in debates or matters that directly relate to them. So it needs to be available in all settings relevant to young people. There is a clear need to educate and inform the community on the realities and risks of illicit drug use, and part of this must be a discussion about and evidence-based information regarding harm minimisation, just as we have in other areas of public policy, and I've mentioned those already. So, part 8 calls on the government to commence the necessary steps to explore how a trial of pill testing could occur during the 2019-20 summer festival season. So, as I said, this motion doesn't call for them to actually undertake a trial, though you could imply that that's where it's headed, and I would suggest that's the case. But it's asking the government to take necessary steps to be prepared and know what they would need to do. So the first step in this process would be, in my view, as happened in other jurisdictions, to establish a Drug Analysis Advisory Committee. This committee should consist of a representative from Tasmania Police, Department of Health, Ambulance Tasmania, the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council, Harm Minimisation Australia, Tasmanian Music Festivals, and a GP with experience in drug addiction as nominated by the RACG, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. That's an idea of who the sort of people you want in the room and around the table having a look at what would need to happen. Tasmanian festivals, Dark Mofo, Falls Festivals and Party in the Paddock are all in support of a trial at the upcoming 2019-2020 Tasmanian Summer Festival season, and are committed to working with the Tasmanian Government to explore a trial should the Government commit or agree. The Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council of Tasmania has repeatedly offered to independently chair this committee, and they will be eminently suitable to do so. Mr. Acting President, before providing my concluding comments, I acknowledge pill testing has its limitations. I've alluded to that previously, and I just want to quote from the Groves article where he states, and I quote, "Another concern related to the threats posed by new psychoactive substances, NPS, which have emerged in Australia following rapid rises in Europe and popularity at dance parties and music festivals. These substances are known as analogues or synthetics, are designed to mimic established drugs and often comprise new untested chemicals used by drug manufacturers to replace others either in short supply or banned through changes into possession, production and importation laws. This means their contents and effects are unpredictable, placing users in the community at further risk of harm due to the ever-increasing number of unknowns." So, Mr President, this is why a targeted and comprehensive education program remains a key aspect of drug policy. The article goes on, I quote, "This risk is demonstrated in recent findings from the US and Canada that several studies identifying the introduction of fentanyl in the illicit drug market. Specifically, evidence suggests that a wide range of pills, for example MDMA and other drugs, methamphetamine and cocaine, have been laced with fentanyl, highlighting the potential danger of relying solely on existing practices and technologies, as often local laboratories or other facilities, for example hospitals and police, do not have the capacity for fentanyl testing and detection of new analogues." End quote. So I said previously, Mr Acting President, if they detect a substance they can't identify from the 30,000 in the database, it's immediately labelled as highly dangerous. So, Mr Acting President, this confirms my previous statements that drug use cannot be and isn't conceptualised or promoted as safe. However, greater knowledge of these substances will arguably improve policy and treatment options and add to the body of knowledge that we have that we can apply to appropriate and effective drug policies. Although no Australian deaths have been confirmed as linked to fentanyl, 10 drug-affected youth did present in one night at the Royal Perth Hospital in 2013, demonstrating the devastating consequences of new batches of unknown substances. That was 10 in one night at the Royal Perth Hospital. These events support the call for pill testing, as it can provide an additional mechanism to understand what new substances are out there and keep up to date with shifts in drug use trends and contribute to more effective prevention and treatment. This knowledge can also assist and could assist law enforcement officers in addressing the very serious crimes of drug trafficking and other illicit drug trade crimes, adding to the harm prevention. It's not instead of, it's as well as. So in conclusion, Mr Acting President, I reiterate the broad community and key stakeholder support for pill testing trials at musical and other festivals in Tasmania. I also reiterate the fact that there is no safe way to take illicit drugs, and pill testing is not a panacea. Rather, it is part of a solution and an important part of a harm minimisation, health-related matter that can be successfully delivered in harmony with law enforcement, as demonstrated in the ACT. Another article by Professor Alison Ritter from the University of New South Wales and published in The Conversation in 2014 and updated in 2018 provides a good summary of the support for, positive impacts and limitations of pill testing, and I quote, "A 2010 survey found that 11% of 20 to 29-year-olds and 7% of 18 to 19-year-olds had taken the drug," which was ecstasy, "in the previous 12 months. According to annual research, among 1,000 ecstasy users, 70% of these pills are taken at clubs, festivals and dance parties." Australia is internationally applauded for our harm minimisation approach to drugs, but we have failed to introduce pill testing, even though it is an intuitively appealing strategy. And further, research shows young people are highly supportive of pill testing. More than 82% of the 2,300 young Australians aged between 16 and 25 years surveyed for the Australian National Council on Drugs in 2013 supported its introduction. Mr Acting President, these are the people who are most at risk. They're the voices we need to hear. And further, the finding is consistent with young people's overall views about drugs. They want better information in order to make informed choices. End quote. And one of those informed choices, maybe not taking the drug at all, and that would be the perfect outcome. Professor Ritter also notes the limitations of pill testing and the need for a comprehensive approach, where she said a harm reduction approach to drugs is always a balance between benefits and risks. The availability of pill testing reduces harm, but it may increase risk for some. Not everyone will use the service, and some may ignore the results and risk being subject to potentially harmful drugs. It may also lend the appearance of safety when in reality the pills remain illegal and potentially harmful. What's more, we need to ensure that pill testing results are accurate by researching the effectiveness of testing kits. Of course, critics will argue that the measure will send the wrong message, but the messages we're currently sending are that we don't want informed consumers and we don't want to reduce harm from illicit drug use. Clearly, they're not quite right either. Australia should run a trial of pill testing and assess its benefits and harms so that we can make informed choice about this intervention. The growth in new psychoactive substances and the ever-evolving chemical composition of drugs, coupled with the need to reduce harms from pill users, means that this is an idea whose time has come, end quote. So, Mr Acting President, I'm not suggesting pill testing should be a standalone tool. Rather, it should form one part of our state drug policy with a health-related focus and a harm minimisation approach. The way to determine the safety and efficacy of such a policy and to prevent gaps in service to ensure a comprehensive health-focused approach is implemented. Furthermore, information gained during pill testing can provide both general data on the consumption trends and market fluctuations and specific targeted information and education to users and potential users to reduce drug-related harms. Whether we like it or not, the issue both illicit and illicitly used drugs is a feature of contemporary social life. It has been for decades, if not for centuries. Community attitudes are changing and alternative strategies are needed to reduce the harms for users, for their families and for the wider community. If members have taken time to talk to young people and festival organisers, publicans and others who hold events where young people gather and party, you will know this is the case. And the reality is that within these dynamic spaces, party drugs such as ecstasy and methamphetamines are readily available and widely used, with recent evidence of increased consumption of more potent forms by young people. Whether we like it or not, as I said, this is the reality. Personally, I prefer not to be needing to have this conversation. But we know that every generation seeks to engage in risky behaviour during this period of their lives, and turning a blind eye or ignoring it and hoping it isn't one of our children or our grandchildren or children of our family and friends actually doesn't help anybody. If we are to provide accurate information, advice and support to those most at risk of harm, sometimes simply through not understanding the risk of such behaviour, isn't this a better outcome? No one deserves to die for taking an ill-considered risk when opportunities to engage with them and educate them about those risks exist. It may be the last chance you get to do it. Therefore, pill testing is needed to monitor and the quality and content of the drugs used, as well as to assess the rapid rise of novel or new psychoactive substances, which pose significant risks to users and those who share the social spaces of clubs and music festivals. Although the government displays strong philosophical support for harm minimisation in a range of risk areas, in practice, the Tasmanian government policy remains conservative in its approach, prioritising law enforcement strategies and zero tolerance policies. And we've seen that reiterated in the media just yesterday. Mr Acting President, this is despite evidence of their limited effectiveness, that's the law enforcement and zero tolerance policies, as well as the growing support from experts, academics and the community highlighting the need for an alternative approach. Despite the illegal nature of the activity and the fact that taking illicit drugs is not safe, there is wide support for that harm reduction and public health focused strategies are needed. There's a need to move away from the politics of drug policy towards more evidence-based strategies to maximise the safety of young people that choose to use drugs who, if given the opportunity to do so more safely, will more likely grow out of the use without the stigma and the harms associated with criminalisation and hopefully not die too young as a result of this risky behaviour. Sadly, some don't get a second chance. I'm hopeful the government will alter their position and support this motion as a step towards a harm minimisation approach that they support in so many other areas. As Groves concludes, and I quote, "While unambiguous zero tolerance measures are unrealistic and disregard contemporary patterns of youth drug use, in contrast, pill testing offers an alternative message that drug use is dangerous, and informing users about what they are taking and the risks not only demonstrates social responsibility from this marginalised group, but also that young people have the capacity for rational decision making and may desist from drug use because they see the risks for the first time." He goes on, pill testing serves as a platform for more nuanced discussion of drug policy, ideas and applications, particularly the need for innovative responses to avoid the deaths of more young Australians. And further, pill testing cannot eliminate the harms of drug use, but it is not intended to. It represents a model that best functions as one part of a much wider harm reduction strategy to provide less punitive and more pragmatic responses to drug use for the protection of a generation of young club and music festival attendees, clearly establishing its worth in the Australian drug context. End quote. Denial of the reality promotes ignorance. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is harmful. I do not want to be one of those parents that get a knock on the door from the police to give you the worst possible news. One of your children is dead. Whilst we can't possibly prevent every death of young people from a range of causes, we can act to reduce the risk and minimise the harm. Just saying no and believing your kids, nieces, nephews, grandchildren and kids of your friends wouldn't or don't take drugs is naive and denies the reality of youth culture. We may not like it and we don't condone it, but it is a reality. We should be focused on our serious law enforcement approach to drug manufacturers, traffickers and dealers. And that should continue. Mr Acting President, I stated earlier this is a pragmatic motion that does not call for the immediate implementation of pill testing. It is a call for the government to explore how a pill testing trial could occur and what steps would be needed to facilitate a trial, particularly for this upcoming summer music festival season. I encourage members to support it from that perspective. Let's be on the front foot, acting proactively and being prepared to engage in a process that will educate our young people through a proven harm minimisation approach, save lives and build on the currently available data and research. That's what this motion is calling for. The actual testing of the substance presented at pill testing station is not the most important part of this process, as I mentioned earlier. The most important part is the interaction with the qualified health professionals. The aim of those health professionals is prevention. The health professionals never suggest that a substance is safe to take and always explain the associated risks of consuming the substance. This is likely to be the first and possibly the only conversation the young person has, other than with a dealer or the friend they've obtained the pills from, where they can get accurate information and advice about the risks associated with not just the drug they're holding in their hand, but illicit drug use generally. This can provide a way out for a young person feeling the effects of peer pressure, providing a legitimate and face-saving reason to dispose of their pills and thus not expose themselves to the risk. We know that the pressure that peer pressure can bring. This can give these young people an out. Ongoing research in this area is being undertaken, following up with users of pill testing facilities to understand whether this also has lasting influence on the young person's future decision around pill taking. As I said at the beginning, taking of illicit drugs is not safe and carries a real risk of serious adverse health outcomes and occasionally tragic deaths, whether we are talking about the so-called party drugs or any other illicit drugs. This motion in no way condones, supports or approves the use of party drugs or any other illicit substances. As a parent, and having talked to parents of young people, they would much prefer this potentially life-saving option than getting a visit from the police with the worst possible news of all. Mr President, Acting President, I call on the government to revisit its opposition to a pill testing trial and investigating the framework with which it would be needed to be set up. For all the reasons I've raised, and recognise the broad community support and the stakeholder support for such a trial to commence once the necessary steps about how to are explored and how to actually engage in that. And I encourage all members to support the motion.